Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for joining us this evening for a second, I would say unexpected, but second online Yom Hashoah ceremony of remembrance, when we will remember the 6 million Jews who perished during the Shoah. In Jewish life, we light a candle on the anniversary of the death of a loved one. We cannot light 6 million candles tonight, but we will light 6 candles, each candle to represent 1 million Jewish souls. I'm delighted that the pupils of King David High School received yellow candles to light, and I hope that this will encourage them to consider the people for whom they have lit candles. Tonight, we're going to hear from a variety of members of our community. They will cover different examples of remembrance. First, from joining with the March of the Living, followed by being a member of the third generation, remembering lost family. Then we will hear from a child's diary, and then about ways to commemorate in future. Each will then light a candle to represent the many who died in differing groups and those now remembering the Shoah. So I call upon Joshua Hugling to talk to us on joining the March of the Living.
Okay, hi everybody. Yeah, I'm here with my dad, and we went on March of the Living 2 years ago. 2 years ago, an incredible experience. To give you a little flavor, so firstly, it always begins the day after Pesach. So wherever you are in the world, everyone congregates at the same place. So I flew from Crete, straight there. My dad flew from Manchester, was it, or Liverpool? Manchester, straight there, and that's non-negotiable. And we all, from all different parts of the world, we're together in the airport, and then we get taken to our buses, and not part of the detail that you want to know, but things like the food is very good and the accommodation is very good. And I don't know if every bus gets a survivor. So, and you meet the survivors and you spend time with them. There's a picture, I don't know if Zara's got it, of my dad with Renee Salt. That's a nice picture to share if you can. That one, yeah. Renee Salt is a legend. Google her, she's incredible. So yeah, so we spend time on the buses. We get to share. Survivors go on each bus, and you can talk to them and have a little bit of an understanding of where they came from. The way the program worked is that they take you to these places where life was quote unquote normal, and you see the lives that existed prior to the Shoah. So you go to the beautiful synagogues that were built, and you basically get a flavor of what it was. And then the way that it works is that from that you then go to the camps and experience, the tragedies and the horrors. Yeah, here's an idea of a program which we can go through. So you arrive in Warsaw, take you to the Poland Museum. You see 1,000 years of Jewish life in Poland, and then also you go to the yeshiva, the old town, and then unfortunately you go to Majdanek, which that place is just horrendous. I can't even begin to explain what that's like. And this, as you see in the evening, the survivor testimony. So it's a very well put together experience. It's actually been a privilege to have experienced it, and have done it with my dad as well has been an incredible experience that we managed to do it together. I don't know, please God, they'll do it again, but unfortunately each year that goes by, there's less and less survivors with us that can, it's a big journey, it's a long journey, and I'm sure it takes a lot out of them. They do it for us, for the love that they have for us, and obviously they do it for their loved ones that are no longer with us. I want to just give you a little flavor. On my first morning there, I went to Shul for Shacharis. They have services there, and Eli Schreier came up to me and he said, "Do you want to get a bracha?" And I said, "Sure. Who's going to give a bracha?" He said, there was a guy there called Harry Ulmer, and basically, when you get a bracha from somebody who has a number on their arm and is laying to fill in at the same time, it's one of the most incredible. And when that person says to you, "Why do you want, I can't give you a bracha. Why would you want a bracha from me?" But that was a really deep, very moving moment for me when Harry. Eventually, I think I managed to force him to give me a bracha, but it wasn't easy. But you see the faith that these people have and the lives that they built after the Shoah is. Look, the truth is that the March of the Living wouldn't be the same without the survivors that go on it. They give so much to the experience. And I don't know, Zara, and then there's times when we get together in the camps, like thousands of us, and we do a march at the end, which there's a video. I don't know if Zara wants to show it.
Yeah, 2 seconds.
Also, would be more ready to allow people to find their own way more. People join
And seeing as we are limited by time, I hope that gives people a flavor of the incredible experience that is March of the Living. I would like to say.
I'm going
to say 2 words here. Basically, it's a very inspiring occasion. It was started in 1988, and since 1988, almost 300,000 participants have taken part on this March of the Living. It's 5 days intensive studying and seeing what life in Poland was like and is like today. We had an educator, you might have seen Clive Lawton on that video that Josh showed. Every coach has an educator who explains every place you go to, every forest, every death camp, every synagogue, every feature of Jewish life that was and is now in Poland. And there is a rebirth of life in places like Krakow, which has an amazing festival every year, a Klezmer, a Jewish festival for a week, which they get 60, 70,000 people going to. But a final thing on the March of the Living is it goes from Auschwitz to Birkenau, which is 3 kilometers. When we went, which was the last one that actually took place, there was almost 12,000 people on it from, I believe, over 100 different countries. Not just young people, mainly young people, but it is an affirmation of life. Yeah. And basically, they tried to annihilate us as a people. And by 12,000 people led by Rabbi Lau, who came out of the camps as the only, together with his brother, the only surviving member of a 1,000-year dynasty. Rabbi Lau has been to every single March of the Living since 1988. And to go to March of the Living with Rabbi Lau, almost 12,000 people, is an affirmation of life. It's saying that the Jewish people live, we should be proud, and we owe it to remember, commemorate those that are not with us, but can see that by the state of Israel today, the Jewish people is thriving. And let us look upon it as a thing to teach our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. Thank you, Barry.
I want to say one final thing, that I wear this jacket as often as I can because it reminds me of the experience and to try and make the most out of life and everything that goes along with that. Okay. I light this candle in memory of Miklos Nemeth of Beherovo and all the students and young people who were murdered in the Shoah. But may the memory be for a blessing.
Amen.
Thank you very much, Josh and Victor. So now I call upon Avinoam Citron of Shoah Hebrew Congregation to recite the memorial prayer in Hebrew.
שוכן במרומים המציע מנוחה נכונה נעל כנפי השכינה במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע המזהירים אס נשמוס 6 מיליוני היהודים חללי השואה ואירופה כל אחינו בני ישראל אנשים נשים וטף שנהרגו ושנטבחו ושנשרפו על קידוש השם בידי המרצחים הנאצים ויוזריהם משאר עמיים בגני עדן תהא מנוחתם לכן בעל רחמים יסתירם בסייסר כנפיו לעולמים ויצרור בצרור החיים אס נשמותיהם עינו נחלתם וינוחו ושלום על משכבותיהם ונאמר אמן.
And now, Nathan Feigelman of Allerton Hebrew Congregation to recite the memorial prayer in English.
O God, who is full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant perfect rest in your divine presence to all the souls of our holy and pure brethren, men, women, and children, whose blood was spilt by the murderers in Auschwitz, Belzec, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, Majdanek, Sobibor, Treblinka, and other extermination camps in Europe, who were killed, strangled, burned, and buried alive for the sanctification of your name, for whose souls we now pray. May their resting place be in the Garden of Eden. May the Master of Mercy shelter them in the shadow of his wings for eternity. And may he bind their souls in the bond of life. Hashem is their heritage, and may they repose in peace in their resting places. And let us say, Amen. I'm going to light a candle in memory of Hannah Nyman of Lithuania.
Thank you, Nathan. I now call upon Jeremy Wolfson to give us our second reading of the evening on being a member of the third generation. Jeremy.
Thank you, Barry. It's an honour to be invited to speak at Liverpool's Yom Hashoah service. One day soon, Holocaust survivors will no longer be able to tell their own stories. In a world where Holocaust denial is rampant, particularly on social media, and against a global context of rising anti-Semitism and increasing levels of disinformation and hate speech, the risk of our collective memory of the Holocaust fading into oblivion becomes more real. Everyone can play a role in reducing the risk, but the burden perhaps falls more squarely on the shoulders of those like myself, third generation Holocaust survivors. I lost great-grandparents, great-aunts, great-uncles and cousins in the Holocaust. Here is our family story. After serving as minister of Hastings and Aberdeen Hebrew congregations, my paternal grandfather, Reverend Meyer Wolfson, wanted to study Shechita. But as training facilities were not available in the UK, my grandfather trained as a shochet with a distant relative, Reb Sholem Klimnicki of Porozov, Poland. My grandfather fell in love with and married the shochet's daughter, my grandmother Sarah, and took her back to Liverpool with him, where he served as a shochet as well as minister of Fountains Road and Fairfield synagogues, and later as emeritus minister of Childwell Hebrew congregation. We have a photo of my late paternal grandparents' wedding in Poland. The photo shows my grandparents, Sarah and Maya, surrounded by about 50 relatives. The photo breaks my heart as all those family pictured, including the beautiful children, were victims of the Holocaust. If my grandmother Sarah hadn't have moved to Liverpool with my grandfather, she would have been a victim of the Holocaust. In Liverpool, my grandparents had 4 children, Betty, Phyllis, Norman, my dear father, and David. These were the children of Liverpoolian Reverend Meyer Wolfson and his Polish wife, Sarah Klimnicki. There was an article published in the Jewish Telegraph in June 2015 exploring our family's experience of the Holocaust. My Auntie Phyllis and Uncle David were both quoted in that article. My grandmother Sarah took her 2 small daughters back to Poland for a visit in 1936. My Auntie Phyllis told the Jewish Telegraph in 2015, "My mother was terribly homesick. Traveling wasn't easy. We went back to Poland to see her family and stayed a few weeks." I can't remember it because I was about 2 or 3 at the time. My Uncle David, who was not born at the time of the Polish trip, told the JT, having bravely passed through Nazi Germany and both the outward and return journeys, my mother and her daughters arrived back safely to Liverpool. That journey was the last meeting between my mother and her family. During the war, no news of Sarah's family was received. Eventually, it became obvious that all her family had been murdered, that out of the 50 or so people in the wedding photo, only the bride and groom had survived. My uncle David told the Jewish Telegraph in 2015, my mother sublimated her natural feelings and didn't mention the very distressing situation of her family. A vacuum had been created. After the war, many efforts were made to trace her family, but they proved fruitless. My grandfather and family didn't speak about the Holocaust for fear of distressing my grandmother Sarah. My grandmother Sarah passed away in 1976, and I sadly didn't get the opportunity to meet her. Even growing up, the family loss in the Holocaust was never discussed with my grandfather for fear of upsetting him. My grandfather, Rev. Meyer Wolfson, passed away in 1994. A few years after his passing, my uncle David was doing some online research, and he discovered that my grandfather had submitted testimony to Yad Vashem in 1978. You can see my grandfather's beautiful, distinctive handwriting on the testimony. The testimony states family name, Chemnicki, first name Sholem, place of birth, Porozo, Poland, name of spouse, Nechi, place of residence before the war, Porozo, Poland, circumstances of death, murdered by the Nazis, signed Meyer Wolfson, 9 St. Clair Drive, Liverpool, England, on the 5th of the 10th, 1978. Relationship to deceased son-in-law. My grandfather's testimony can be found on the Yad Vashem website in the section entitled The Central Database of Shoah Victims' Names. My grandfather had not told any of the family he had submitted testimony to Yad Vashem, so it was a total surprise to discover his testimony on the Yad Vashem website. Growing up, I was aware of the family loss in the Holocaust from discussions I had with Dad, but as I said earlier, we never just talked about it with my grandfather. We don't know what precisely happened to our family in the Holocaust, and I can't imagine the pain they went through. It's like a vacuum, and I feel Dad in the heart. I know Dad feels the same, and he always recites Kaddish for our lost relatives at Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av services. I have always found it extremely difficult to watch films and documentaries about the Holocaust and to listen to Holocaust survivors. I just break down crying. As a city councillor, I was invited to be Liverpool City Council's lead on Holocaust Memorial Day, chairing the city's HMD steering group. Holocaust Memorial Day, HMD, takes place on the 27th of January each year and is the National Day of Remembrance for all the victims of the Holocaust and other more recent genocides such as Cambodia, Bosnia, Rwanda, and Darfur. The role of myself and the HMD steering group is to organise the special Holocaust Memorial Day service held annually at Liverpool Town Hall. However, because of the pandemic, this year's HMD service was a virtual service with guest speaker Dame Louise Elman. As Liverpool City Council's lead on Holocaust Memorial Day over the years, I've done a lot of work with the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority, who regularly support HMD with events which engage their staff. This year, I joined the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority's weekly prayer group. Chewell Synagogue's Rabbi Citron was also in attendance. I spoke about my own family's experience of the Holocaust. Rabbi Citron delivered a blessing in Hebrew and English and lit a virtual candle to remember the 6 million Jews murdered during the Shoah, alongside the millions of other people killed under Nazi persecution. Every year, I help with Merseyside Unite Against Fascism's Holocaust Memorial Day commemoration, which is usually held in the Hornby Library at Liverpool Central Library. For many years, in the day surrounding Holocaust Memorial Day, I and the HMD steering group organised for Father's House exhibition, which raises awareness of the Holocaust, to be staged in the Hall of Remembrance at Liverpool Town Hall. As a councillor, I was invited to speak to Liverpool Schools Parliament and to local schools about the Holocaust and my own family's experience. The last school I spoke to before I stepped down from being a city councillor was Dovecot Primary School, whose pupils asked me lots of questions. I was nervous about taking on the role of Liverpool City Council's lead on Holocaust Memorial Day and sharing the city's HMD steering group. I thought it would be too upsetting because of my own family circumstances. However, I have found that it is so important in raising awareness, keeping the memory of the victims alive. I hope other third-generation Holocaust survivors do all they can to raise awareness so we can keep the memory of the victims alive. Thank you. And I'm now going to light the third candle. I light the third candle in memory of Marie Buch of Paris, who perished at Auschwitz in 1942, aged 9, and on behalf of all the third generation.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. And now I call on Eden Sharabi, young president of the MJRC, who will read from a diary.
Peter Fagel was born Klaus Peter Fagel on March 1st, 1929 in Berlin, Germany. Like many assimilated Central European Jews of the period, the family did not practice Judaism, nor was there any Judaic in the home. In 1937, sensing the rising threat of Nazism in Europe, his father had Peter baptized as a Catholic, hoping to protect him from the Nazis' anti-Jewish policies. Peter, who had never had a Jewish upbringing, recalled that he immediately began taking catechism classes and services as an altar boy. According to Peter's recollections from that point forward, he considered himself a Catholic. In March 1938, the Anschluss brought Austria under German domination. His father consequently wasted no time fleeing Austria from Belgium, taking the family and leaving most of their property behind. There they remained until the outbreak of German hostilities in Western Europe in 1940, with the invasion of Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. Peter, his mother, and his grandmother fled to France. In mid-July 1942, amid deportations of foreign Jews in France, his mother succeeded in having 13-year-old Peter enrolled in and sent to a summer camp sponsored by Catholic charitable organizations. A few weeks later, his parents were arrested and sent to the internment camp at Le Vernet. It was this devastating news that prompted Peter to begin writing a diary intended for his dear parents in mid-September. The letters from his parents ceased entirely. It is abundantly clear from the diary that whatever his fears, Peter had no real knowledge at the time of his parents' fate. They had listed among those on Convoy 28, which departed Drancy the morning of September 4th and arrived in Auschwitz-Birkenau 2 days later. They were most probably murdered on arrival, together with all but about 54 of the 1,000 Jews from the same transport. In January 1943, Peter had the good fortune to be sent to a Protestant village in the Haute-Loire, where many locals were sheltered and harbored Jews and refugees, especially children. Peter remained there for about 10 months, during which time he was given false identity papers, which with his new name was Pierre Fasson. The locals ran a sort of underground railroad that continually supplied newcomers with false identity papers and then sent them on to new destinations, allowing still more people in need to take their places. In May 1944, Peter's escape into neutral Switzerland was organized. The children were given instructions on what to do and how to cross, and on May 22nd, 1944, Peter made a break for it and ran from France into Switzerland. Peter remained in Switzerland until July 1946, when he came to the United States. He now lives with his wife in Florida. The 2 volumes of his diary are in the collection of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. I light this fourth candle in memory of Jacques Levy of Bois Columbus, and on behalf of all children to remember the 1,500,000 murdered children of the Shoah.
Thank you very much, Eden. And now I call upon Warren Elf, who will talk on the topic of remembrance.
Good evening, and thank you for asking me to say a few words tonight. In particular, I've been asked to explore the significance of Yom HaShoah into the future when we have fewer survivors around to give their testimony. And I think it's important to state that the testimonies we have, the films, the written evidence, the books, the diaries, all the written testimonies are vital and crucial for us. I think I'd like to start with just considering the significance and the role of Yom HaShoah and the way its shape has evolved over the years. The first Yom HaShoah was fixed by the Israeli Knesset in 1951, and 8 years later, in 1959, it was enshrined in law that Yom HaShoah would be an annual day of commemoration, a day to remember the Shoah and the resistance in the ghettos, the resistance of those who tried to find ways of fighting back against the Nazis and delaying and destroying their attempts to exterminate the Jews. The ceremonies evolved in different ways, depending where people were and which communities. And some communities preferred to use, and still prefer to use, Tisha B'Av to remember the atrocities of the Shoah. But the vast majority of us feel that it was such a massive event for the Jewish world that a special day is necessary for its remembrance. Within about 30 years or so of the end of the Shoah, we were able to start to get survivor testimony. But it took that long and longer for survivors to be able to process some of the trauma and some of the stuff that they had been through before they were able to start to talk about what they had experienced and the atrocities of what they'd been through, what they'd seen, the family members that they'd lost. The number of survivor testimonies increased from the late 1970s, with many more survivors feeling more able to talk about what they and their families had been through. And probably 30 to 40 years is the minimum we could expect for people to overcome that trauma sufficiently to be able to talk about it. I clearly remember as a student rabbi back in the early 90s, when one member of my community came to me to tell me that he'd started going to some support sessions for survivors that Jewish Care were running. I think it was through the 45A Society or second generation. No, before second generation. And he said to me, they're trying to find ways for themselves to be able to talk about their experience. And he's never spoken to a group before. Would it be possible to talk to our group of bar bat mitzvah young people? It was only a group of 10 or 12 youngsters at the time. And I said, of course, and was quite looking forward to him being able to talk about what he'd been through. This was about 3 weeks before the agreed date. After the Shabbat service the week before, his wife came up to me and she said, would it be possible for her to come and sit at the back to hear him talk to the young people? I said, yes, of course there would, no problem at all. I said, because, and they've been married over 20 years. So in all the time I've known him and we've been married, he's never spoken about what he'd been through. It was all too difficult for him to be able to convey any of that to his loved ones. So very clearly, the trauma the survivors went through impacts on not just them, but their partners and their children and their grandchildren. We know how important the personal testimonies of the survivors are. But I think of equal importance are the personal testimonies of their children and grandchildren. And we're very fortunate to have one of those this evening. But the second and third generation also have a massive significance to play in the continuation of Yom HaShoah and Holocaust memory. Many of us will know some of the Windermere children, and many of them settled in the Northwest, having left Windermere after coming over from Theresian. And I know that Beryl Obukovsky, Bob Obukovsky, used to give many talks. And then as he got older, his daughter Sue started to give the presentations with him. And since he died, his daughter Sue has continued that. And in fact, she's in charge of the education work of the 45 Aid Society, very much through working with the second generation. So I have no doubt that the intergenerational trauma, the trauma that affects the survivors, their partners, their children, and their grandchildren, can be just as effective when conveying what happened, the atrocities that happened, and the lasting effect. And sometimes groups, when they're hearing the testimony of the second or third generation, often ask what impact it had on them as well and how it affected them growing up. But I think there's another aspect we need to focus on as well, especially as we look towards the future. And that is the transgenerational trauma. It's the stuff around the ongoing issues, the need to try and find ways of dealing with this for us as the Jewish community. And we need to find ways of looking at it and dealing with it, partly because it's there, but also to try and find healing and warning. Healing for ourselves, very much. Finding ways of dealing with the Shoah, dealing with what it means to us, fully accepting the impact, the significance, and how we need to move forward with that. But the warning as well, partly for ourselves, that this must never happen again, and we must always watch out for the signs, but also a warning for others. What is the ongoing impact on us as the Jewish community, originally in the 20th century and now well into the 21st century? We said never again. And of course, we meant never again to us, but also we did mean to never again to any other group either. And we know we failed. We've heard about this importance of Holocaust Memorial Day and our role in that. But that's also a day to remember that we failed because there have been other genocides since the end of the Nazis. Yom HaShoah and Holocaust Memorial Day are both equally significant, but in very different ways. Yom HaShoah is for us. Holocaust Memorial Day is the day when we want all the world to know and to realize the importance of Holocaust education, of knowing what happened, of understanding what happened, and trying to move forward from that and make sure it never happens to anyone else ever again. So I think The intergenerational trauma is there, and we need to explore the transgenerational trauma and work out what its implications are. And part of that is exploring and overcoming Holocaust denial. Part of that is overcoming lack of interest. Part of that is overcoming the disinterest or boredom of groups who say, oh, we've heard that before. Yes, but they need to listen and understand. And part of it as well is the disbelief of people who could not believe that human beings could do that to others. And of course, we know that the survivors' testimony and their children's and grandchildren's is so important. So the intergenerational trauma we have lived with, and we need to continue to hear from the survivors and their children and grandchildren. But we also need to deal with the transgenerational trauma, what that means for all the Jewish community, for all the Jewish world, to work out what it means for us, how we can deal with it. And that is something we need to continue to explore, and we can probably do that using Yom HaShoah in the years ahead. I'd like to end by lighting my candle in memory of Solomon Linovsky of Paris, who died aged 9 in Auschwitz. In 1942. And I'm lighting that in memory of him and all the others who died and perished. On behalf, not just of myself, but of faith leaders and interfaith leaders and the interfaith community who stand with us as we remember and we recall the loss of our 6 million. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Warren. I now call upon Max Marcus, Chairman of the Merseyside Jewish Representative Council, to make closing remarks.
Thank you, Barry. May I thank Josh Huggin, his dad, Victor, Jeremy Wilson, Eden Sharabi, and Warren Elf. May I also thank you, Barry, and your son-in-law, Michael Nelson, and Zara Ross for bringing together this evening. And as you said before, Barry, for you and for Michael, this is the second year, quite unbelievable, but there it is, of Yom HaShoah on Zoom. I thank Johnny Cohen for his accommodation in making tonight's event run smoothly, and Abinoam Citron, Natan Fagelman for reciting the prayers. And would you all forgive me if I mention Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut, which is next week, and the details will be in the community magazine. If you are a regular subscriber, you will receive it tomorrow. If you don't and you want to, members of the Jewish community in Liverpool and Merseyside are entitled to a copy every week, free. You need to register with Schiffer & House. I light this candle in memory of Jetka Wexelblatt of Borshchow in Ukraine, who was murdered by the Nazis aged 10, and also on behalf of the entire Merseyside Jewish community.
Thank you, Max. So let the light of these 6 candles signify that we will remember and never forget the victims of the Shoah. Their memory should burn bright, and as long as we live, they too will live. We will conclude our Yom HaShoah ceremony this evening by playing the national anthem and then the Hatikva. Feel free to join in and unmute yourselves to do so. Thank you.
בלבב בנימה נפש יהודי הומיה ולפת מזרח קדימה עין לציון צופיה עוד לא אבדה תקוותנו התקווה בת שנות 2000 בהיותם חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון ירושלים בהיותם חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון ירושלים